Gonna need a win if they have hopes of top 8ing.
See, Ross, our 3rd ranked player, has had a great run through the Opens and Invitationals this year. And like I said, in 2 weeks, we're going to be seeing him in Roanoke.
Ross winning the die roll, he'll be on the play. But these decks, I mean, in these tokens mirrors, it's going to be the anthems that win. Cards like even Just Sky Charm seems to be pretty good here just for that reason.
Well, yeah, it's true. Although because of that, I don't think you're going to see any my 6 tokens block your 6 tokens type of exchanges.
Absolutely not. Both players trade off on Mystic Monasteries to start the game. And remember, these decks in the main do not have an answer to a resolved Jeskai Ascendancy, or really a cast one. They can't counter it or remove it. So that card is just the card.
And I don't think there's any way to really operate in the game when a player has it and another doesn't. Because you can't, it's hard to move into combat. You can't really block their creatures because of +1/+1. And you can't really attack into their board because of the untap clause. It's all very challenging.
Ross with a turn 2 raise the alarm. He does not have a turn 3 Ascendancy. He's on a Temple. Looks like he does have the Ascendancy in his hand, however. Let's see if he makes his way toward that. Scries to the bottom. And Pordes also with turn 3 tap land. And swing from Ross. That puts Casey down to 16. And it's interesting because their burn in this matchup is just not suited well here. It's all, it's all single target, and there's hardly any targets for it.
Exactly. Though it deals enough, big chunks of damage that these shots that Ross is getting in right now will add up when it comes time to start looking at Stoke the Flames and Jeskai Charm.
And this is just it. Ross did have the Jeskai Ascendancy. He makes it on turn 4. Casey making it to turn 4 without casting a spell, so a very slow start for him. Does he have his own Ascendancy? Not yet. It's Hordeling Outburst for him.
Casey way behind at this point. And like I mentioned, I think it's going to be really hard for him to win inside of combat because Ross has an Ascendancy and Casey does not.
And Ross, this is gonna end quicker than you'd think too. It looks like Casey actually does have his own copy of Jeskai Ascendancy in hand, so we may see some fireworks as early as next turn.
The problem is the Ascendancy is effectively, that's a turn off that someone has to take unless you have a really advanced board and a lot of mana. And with Casey already falling behind, it's not clear if he's going to have the breathing space to take a turn off. He probably has to just to have a hope of catching up in the game, but it's tough.
You see Ross here making a Hordeling Outburst, swinging in a pair of 2/2s. Casey really can't afford to block these guys.
And this is the problem that Casey's going to get into. You see, he has Hordeling Outburst and Ascendancy. Both of these at this point require his whole turn, and neither of them do very much. If it's Ascendancy, his board isn't developed, and he can't trigger it in the same turn, or it's going to be hard to.
Now,
and if it's the Hordeling Outburst, he can't block the tokens, because if Ross plays a spell, Casey loses his whole board.
Now, he does have one thing available to him here. I believe his hand is a 5th land, a Jeskai Ascendancy, and 2 Stoke the Flames. So he could actually defensively play a lot of spells into his own Jeskai Ascendancy. But you're right, it may still not be too much.
Yeah.
You see Ross pumping again with Stoke the Flames.
Yeah, he's stoking twice. He's doing this all for free off the Raise the Alarms and Goblin tokens.
So Stokes twice. That means it's going to be 8 damage to Casey. He'll go to 8, and the 2 creatures are both 8/8s, 4/4s now, so that's actual 8 damage. Casey's forced to Stoke the Flames here to not die.
This deck is no joke.
I mean, Stoke the Flames is incredible with Jeskai Ascendancy and with tokens.
Yeah.
So he's going to pass back Casey down to 4. And you know that Ross actually in hand has a Jeskai Charm. That should be good enough for him to take the game.
I don't see how Casey gets out of this spot. Ross sitting up in his chair a little bit.
Oh, he knows.
I've known this from my own little endeavors with burn strategies, what that means.
That means you're dead.
Just cannot wait to untap.
Yeah. We'll see. Right here, Casey's going to start with Jeskai Ascendancy. He doesn't have land 5. He'll pass the turn. Ross should just have him dead. Can show Jeskai Charm. And that will be it. Game 1 in Ross Merriam's favor.
when this deck is doing its thing, it just looks like a modern deck
Well,
in a sea of standard decks.
yeah, I mean, let's go and look at that game. There's no disruption. There's very little disruption and interaction in this game one. So both decks just get to go are off to the races. And right there, Ross with the ascendancy, and especially being on the play, he's the one who gets to take the game.
So post board, Ross has access to 2 Erase, 2 Glare of Heresy, 3 End Hostilities, and Elspeth, 3 Disdainful Strokes, 2 Negates, 2 Anger of the Gods. I think that the sideboarding here is going to be pretty light. I don't really like going into Anger of the Gods and Hostilities type of stuff when both players have exactly the same tools. It can be a little weird to engineer. I like the Negates and the Glare of Heresies. There's so many spells in the matchup. They're both good answers to Jeskai Ascendancy. Erase might be going a little too deep for my liking because it's only good against Ascendancy, but there is the upshot if you get to loot it away if it's not shaping up to be that sort of game. I think the Glares and Negates come in for sure, and the Erases are maybes.
So why would the only difference in a Glare and a Negate and an Erase is that Glare can hit, I suppose, a Raise the Alarm token and a Seeker of the Way, right?
Yeah, and Seeker, I think that's enough to tilt it over.
That's enough to tilt it. If it's all about Jeskai Ascendancy, we might see them board an Erase
yeah,
as well.
It's possible that card's just so important, and by the looks of game one, that very well may be the case.
Now, on Casey's side, I think Casey has the stronger sideboard here. He has a full 4 copies of Negate in his sideboard, along with a copy of Erase. And Negate seems fantastic in this matchup.
It seems very, very good. There is a little bit of awkwardness that it makes it harder to commit for Hordling Outbursts and such, so I think I would prefer to have a mixture of counter spells and main phase stuff, so you can still curve out efficiently when you want to. That being said, Negate is good against all sorts of parts of Ross's deck, not just the Jeskai Ascendancy.
Exactly.
So it's a very nice card to have access to.
Yeah, the decks are 8 creatures, 28 spells, so Negate almost a hard counter here.
Yeah, it's a nice upgrade in the matchup. I don't know if it's the best configuration for the mirror match because, again, tapping out can be a little hairy sometimes, but it's still very good for this matchup.
Yeah, I think the reason I like Erase here is the instant speed for me seems really important, especially with how explosive these decks could be. I could see a situation where Ross could make a Hordling Outburst and then on the next turn just play an Ascendancy and immediately stoke a couple times and swing for 9. You're like,
yeah.
Hey, and you could be sitting there looking at that Glare of Heresy and being like, well, that didn't work.
Yeah. The type of draw that Ross got is fairly specific, but definitely a possibility.
Yeah. Either way, these games look to be quick affairs.
Well, I think that it's game one at least. That's going to be the way the game plays out because neither player can interact with Ascendancy, and if someone gets to it first, that's probably going to be the game. I think post board, the game might slow down a little bit because both of these players can interact with each other in a way that they couldn't in game one. Still, there is the risk of unchecked Ascendancy just runs away with it in much the same way.
Absolutely.
Because there aren't that many answers. There's more, but it's not like there's 20 ways to get it off the table. There's a couple counters and a couple removal spells.
Does the game go, so how do you feel about the treasure cruises in this matchup? Just how fast are we going here?
I like the treasure cruises here, I think, just because both players are a little bit more equipped to deal with Ascendancy. And in that sort of game, you're probably going to have tokens bouncing off of each other a bunch, and you're going to have, removal spells being targeted at creatures, and if the game's taking on a slower pace post-board, the treasure cruise gets a lot better. Game one, it seems like it's all about Ascendancy, but after sideboard, it wouldn't surprise me if it was a little different.
It still might be primarily about Ascendancy, but there's other sub-themes in there.
Exactly. It's like creature matchups in Legacy that involve Umezawa's Jitte. Often, that's the thing that matters, and if it goes unchecked.
Right.
But there's all sorts of jockeying over that card, and assuming one person doesn't run away with it, then you start moving to the secondary and tertiary aspects of the deck in the matchup.
Yeah, this Jeskai Tokens deck, for those of you who have not seen it before, it's kind of been an evolving thing over the course of the season. We've started with these, it was mostly Jeskai just being played out of a combo deck, and we saw a Jeskai Heroic combo. I think the closest thing we saw to this was Harlan Fear's deck 2 weeks ago that won the Standard Open, which was Jeskai Tokens combo. It was basically this deck, but with Retraction Helixes, the Retraction Helix, kind of Briber's Purse in it.
Yep.
And then with Yuya Watanabe's build earlier this week, might be the end result of that evolution. We'll see.
It's hard for me to imagine the list getting much better, but I've said that every single time I've seen the deck in action. So every iteration has felt like the best iteration.
Both players just starting on pairs of lands. Casey with fetch lands is going to get some basics on Ross's end step. Which person will move first? How much do they respect negates here?
Well, things like Raise the Alarm make for good test spells, because if they resolve, sweet, and if they don't, no big deal.
See if that's what Casey has. You see, he does have one of his 4 copies of negate there. But
I don't know if he has red mana just yet.
yeah, he does have Raise the Alarm. You're right, though. 2 red spells in hand and no sources of red at the moment. 3 flooded strands. Draws another copy of negate. So Casey does not have a great proactive start, but these 2 negates will buy him plenty of time. Unless Ross has something like Goblin Rabblemaster, which fits in just the right spot to really run away with this.
Exactly.
And he does not. He has Jeskai Ascendancy. That will be negated.
I like using a negate on that card because the game is over otherwise.
Strong decision.
Big fan of that play from Casey.
You should counter the good card with the card you boarded in to counter it.
And that's the 3rd flooded strand there from Casey. And I think that might have been the last land that he could get with a flooded strand, and it was on top of his deck.
Well, so good thing he used that on end step.
That would have been a really horrible draw step otherwise.
You see on Casey's hand, he has another negate. He has a Stoke the Flames, and it looks like a Treasure Cruise, which he actually could cast this turn.
And it's a pretty good consolation prize if he can't find red mana. And he still may want to cast it.
But top card of the deck, Basic Mountain. Gonna put Ross down to 15. Casey seems to have control of this game so far. Interestingly enough, he's not dealing damage per se, but see if he wants to go cruising. He'll take down negates that he can do it.
This feels like a little bit of game 1, but in reverse, where Casey was slow to the board and Ross had a lot of stuff going on. And this game, Ross still has not gotten anything to resolve, and Casey has drawn 3 cards. He's got some pressure in play.
Yeah, Stoke, Rabblemaster, negate, Hordling Outburst. A lot of great tools. He's tapped down for this turn. We'll see what Ross can get into play. He's got to make this one count, because the double negate is going to be really strong after this. And Hordling Outburst will be what he gets to resolve. Back over to Casey.
But all this plays so well for Casey right now because Ross is forced to respond in his own turn. So if Casey ever draws an Ascendancy, he can get into play, and he's really controlling the terms of combat right now.
Token swing. Ross is willing to trade some off here. It's fine by Casey. His draw for the turn was Raise the Alarm. Looks like he's just going to do that one on end step so that he can continue to hold up negate. When he hits land 5, he'll be able to make a Goblin Rabblemaster as well. Right now, he is only on 4. You see Ross try for another Jeskai Ascendancy, and none of that from Casey. He'll negate that one, too. And Ross just keeps it seems like he's trying for the Ascendancies at the wrong times.
It's tough. Casey's playing so efficient with his mana right now.
Yeah, well, there was a window where he could have resolved a spell, but each time he's I don't know, it seems like he's getting the wrong spell. Lightning Strike, the draw for Casey.
Well, Ross also might have felt, even if he had the Ascendancy, the turn that he played Hordling Outburst, he might have felt like he couldn't take the turn off to get Ascendancy into play. If your follow-up gets negated, then things are not getting better, you know? So I think he felt maybe he had to get the Hordling Outburst into play just to be able to block and try to resolve the Ascendancy down the line.
And Casey willing to fall behind on the board even. He swung his 1 Goblin token. That was ambushed by Ross's Raise the Alarm. Despite having cards in his hand, Casey still wants to hold up this negate, as now Ross is the one attacking. Here's a Temple of Triumph for Casey.
Casey not under that much pressure and really waiting for more lands and double red.
Another Raise the Alarm from Ross. We'll see just how patient Casey wants to be. Is this worth negating? And he doesn't want Ross to get too far ahead. He will negate.
This also frees up Casey to start using his mana on other things. I think that Raise the Alarm is just good enough to negate, and it frees up Casey to do other stuff.
Ross with his best follow-up is Seeker of the Way. No Jeskai Ascendancy there. And Casey will lightning strike it on end step. And you're right, now with his mana free, we'll see just what Casey gets to cast here. He has land 6, a full bevy of red cards, now 3 red sources.
And way ahead on resources. Still that Treasure Cruise.
Treasure Treasure Cruise still good. Hordling Outburst from Casey. That's going to be 3 goblins. He gets ahead on creatures once again. Goblin Rabble Master joining the Hordlings. It'll make a creature, and that one will have haste. It will attack. Ross down to 11 and behind on the board.
Multiple Stokes, at least one Stoke left in Casey's hand. Casey's just ahead on every facet of the game right now.
And that's one of the things about when you see these Treasure Cruise mirror matches, is it's not just, it's about resolving the first Treasure Cruise. That seems the most important one, because once you get the first Treasure Cruise, then you usually also get the second Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, it's rare that it's equilibrium. Usually the first one to do it gets to do the second one and so on.
Stoke the Flames from Ross takes care of the Rabble Master. Casey stokes back. That one's just at Ross. He goes down to 6. And swings for 2, puts Ross to 4, follows up with Stoke, and we're on to game 3.
As you mentioned, while the players were sideboarding, Stoke the Flames seems just awesome. Or excuse me, Negate rather seems just awesome in the mirror match. It allowed Casey to control the entire way the game got played.
Updates from across the board. If you're a fan of this Jeskai Tokens deck, Brad Nelson moving to 7-1 with the deck. 1 round from the top 8 and from really solidifying his players' championship position.
I think this deck is just awesome. I think you need an active reason to not want to play this deck.
Until people figure out, I'm not sure this deck has a bad matchup at the moment. It seems absurdly powerful to me. And I know earlier in this tournament, we saw Obzon Reanimator be great. And actually our 2 undefeated decks are both Obzon Reanimator decks. So you have to give credit where it's due, but I don't see a weakness in this deck.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm sure it's there. It's a matter of time and finding it and so forth, but as long as Ascendancy and Treasure Cruise are legal, they give the deck so much durability that you can't just attack the deck by going after tokens. That's not good enough.
What if you look at Joe Lissette? He's 6-1. He's playing Blue-White Heroic. Does he stand a chance?
I think so. I think he's got a reasonable shot.
Right. Maybe that is a shot against Jeskai. That's certainly a deck with weaknesses, though.
Yeah, it's one of. I think the thing you need to be able to do is, can I win the games where they don't have Ascendancy? If you're confidently answering yes, then I think you've got a real shot. And I think a deck like Blue-White Heroic definitely has an edge in the games that don't involve Ascendancy. Because 1/1 tokens aren't very good against it. It can generate a very fast kill. It can ignore blockers. God's Willing and Feat of Resistance are pretty efficient against the removal spells. That seems
once
like
your
a
guy gets 5 toughness, it's really hard for Ross's deck to kill it.
That seems like a good recipe to me. I can get behind that.
I can also just get behind a lot of negates. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe that's just the control mage in me talking.
I think Negate's a reasonable starting point too.
But the deck's really powerful. Even with those things that we're talking about, things that seem like you're trying to beat the Jeskai Tokens deck, I could also see myself losing to Jeskai Tokens with that deck. And I think that's the problem.
You could build a blue-black deck if you had access to Thoughtseize, Negate, Perilous Vault, and Drown in Sorrow. I think that's a good. If you have access to those cards in your 75,
I'll be good.
BioBlight as a game 1 removal spell, I think you could put something together there that would be good against this deck.
If only Ratchet Bomb were still in the format.
Ratchet Bomb would be a really good answer.
As of right now, we don't have any sort of cheap token sweeper. And we are on to game 3. So if I were to describe game 2, I would go back and say, I want to talk about the importance of those negates that Casey Pordes had. Do you feel like Casey, do you think, is that game, there's a couple ways you can look at it. You can say Casey won because of his negates, and you can say Casey won because being on the play is just that good.
It's a mixture of the two, and being on the play magnifies the power level of negate because it allows Casey to get on the board and then keep Ross off of his big stuff. I'm curious to see if on the draw he's able to do the same thing, because if Ross just opens up on Seeker of the Way, Casey probably has to react to that. If he has a turn 3 Hordling Outburst, then Casey has to react to that. If Casey's constantly responding to Ross's plays, that might give Ross the window to sneak an Ascendancy into play. And then once Ascendancy's in play, Casey really doesn't have the same number of ways to get it off the table. So negate, much more powerful on the play than on the draw. I'm sure it's good in the matchup no matter what, but I'm curious to see if it changes a lot because Ross will be the one applying pressure first, most likely.
Yeah. I would just, yeah, to me, the die roll seems very, I know you can say that about a lot of matchups and Magic, that the die roll is important. I really do feel like the die roll is important in this one, though.
Well, once you get behind, it's really hard to catch up.
Yeah.
Other matchups have better ways of breaking serve, not so much here.
Both players are going to trade Mystic Monasteries to start the game. Looking over at Casey's side, you see he does have a copy of Jeskai Ascendancy in hand, but it's going to be Ross making the first play. It's going to be a Seeker of the Way. Lands and Treasure Cruise for Casey. And we'll see if this game, how Ross wants to play his Jeskai Ascendancies. He kind of ran them into negates last game. This time he's just going to go with a pair of Seeker of the Ways and a Temple to follow it up. Casey does have an opening to make Jeskai Ascendancy, but I was going to say he's under a lot of pressure. He's going to get to Lightning Strike one of these Seekers.
And the fact that Casey played the Lightning Strike at the end of the turn there rather than straight away on his own turn, if I'm in Ross's position, I really respect the possibility of negate because that would explain that play. I don't know if Casey has it, but it would stand to reason. It's possible he left with the Lightning Strike just out of respect for Rabble Master. He wants to kill that instead of the Seeker.
That seems like a lot of damage. I don't know. Yeah, you have to have a read on him there. He gets free reign. He's going to go with Goblin Rabble Master so that he can get the token off it. It's not yet time for Ascendancy. Shields are down, however. We'll see what Ross does with this opening. He can make Ascendancy or kill Rabble Master, but he can't do both.
Against a person that's shown that many negates, I really like getting the Ascendancy into play as the first order of business.
Yeah, he does have one.
Ross also has Treasure Cruise in hand and not much of a graveyard, so that's another incentive to get the Ascendancy into play. He can then start looting and maybe get to his Treasure Cruise.
See Ross's hand. He has at least one land, a Jeskai Charm, a Jeskai Ascendancy. He'll start with Temple of Epiphany. And by playing Ascendancy here, he's really gonna, that would be letting himself get behind on the board. It would be, he'd be paying a price to get that card in play.
He definitely is, but the Ascendancy pays itself back and then some very quickly.
Also has Hordling Outburst available, but I can't imagine he picks that one over Jeskai Ascendancy.
We saw the play, a similar play out in the last game where he was committed to the board first and trying to get the Ascendancy into play. Maybe that changes now because he knows that Casey has a bunch of negates, but...
Yeah, maybe Casey there's a danger, right? If Ross plays Ascendancy, Casey starts beating up Ross with Rabble Master. Casey negates the Outburst, lets Ross have an Ascendancy, and before you know it, Ross is dead to a bunch of goblins.
Well, Ross has a lot of control over the damage risk with Seeker of the Way, too. I mean, he doesn't
agree.
just get overrun by the Rabble Master.
See what he picks. Is it the Outburst? It's going to be Hordling Outburst over Jeskai Ascendancy. Bold play. We'll see how it plays out here. Seeker will swing in for 3. Now Casey has an opening for an Ascendancy of his own. As we saw before, the first Ascendancy can be the best one.
Well, this is a full turn-off from Casey, too, to play the Ascendancy. It's not free.
Swing with 2 goblins here from Casey. If Ross is I can't imagine Ross wants to trade here.
Well, if he's...
Maybe he does.
If he's banking on the fact, if he's respecting the possibility that his Ascendancy does not resolve, I think that makes him a lot more inclined to trade.
As it turns out, though, Casey will make the same play. Hordling Outburst here. Both players are really caring about this board presence a lot more than they're caring about Jeskai Ascendancy.
Well, the problem is if you fall behind on the board and cast the Ascendancy, that can allow your opponent to also resolve an Ascendancy, and then the fact that you have yours in play doesn't matter as much.
Right.
So the first concern's got to be to the board. I think if you want to play Ascendancy in a turn where you're able to play Ascendancy and a removal spell or another threat, then go ahead and do that. But it's really hard to justify taking the whole turn off unless you're really far ahead on the board.
Really interesting dynamic here. There's a lot of play to this right now.
Yeah.
And Ross is going to make the enchantments now. That'll prowess up the Seeker of the Way. And he'll just pass the turn. Seeker is gonna, he doesn't want to get hit by that Rabble Master.
Yeah, that was the turn off.
Here's Casey, this time with land 5. Ross missed land 5, Casey does not. And if he has Ascendancy and removal and, say, Lightning Strike, that's going to be really bad for Ross. Casey, a Jeskai Ascendancy of his own. He's got a better board presence. If he has a 2-mana kill spell, that's really big news.
I think he's got Raise the Alarm.
I suppose it doesn't even matter if it's a kill spell. If he has a non-creature spell, it's really good. So here come 4 Goblins and a Rabble Master. Ross is just going to chump the Rabble Master. That's good enough for Casey. He'll use Raise the Alarm anyway. Yeah, I think maybe correctly these guys have cared a ton about board presence here.
Yeah, you can see why. I mean, in this spot, it would not have mattered if Ross had gotten his Ascendancy into play first, because Casey just built up a better board.
Ross going to lose the Goblin, and he'll be down 6 creatures now as he takes 8 damage. He's got Seeker of the Way. Now, what Ross could have is if he's bordered in any of his Anger of the Gods, he could...
Yep.
Wow, and that is... How good is this?
Perfect. I mean, he gets the Seeker to a 4/4.
This is disgusting.
Yeah, I did not know if either one of these players was going to get to Anchor here.
What? And this is just a game changer for Ross.
Yeah,
in a game that he otherwise I think he has lost.
It's his whole board, and he gets a loot there. He's closer to being able to resolve the Treasure Cruise. He's draining for 4 this turn. That's an enormous swing.
Well done, Mr. Merriam. And now the board is just a pair of Jeskai Ascendancies. Ross with a Seeker of the Way.
And Casey with a Lightning Strike in hand, are you willing to Lightning Strike right now? Because if Ross has a spell,
You lose it.
you get nothing, and you're probably dead.
Yeah, do it. I'd do it. I understand. I accept the consequences of being dead here if he has a spell. I don't think you're ever killing it if you don't.
Yeah.
You see Casey here. This is a tough call. He knows it.
He's also got, his hand is just 2 copies of Treasure Cruise, too. So he's just got to cast things. He can't say go.
Lightning Strike. He's going to loot off Jeskai Ascendancy, discarding a Flooded Strand. And it works. And with 2 copies of Treasure Cruise, that was a big risk taken by Casey, and it may have just paid off. He goes down to 7, but he's going to get to Treasure Cruise here.
I don't think you can afford to not go for that play this turn. He's got to try.
Yep. Completely agree. Draws a red spell. Stoke. Does he want... He has to loot here. Yes, you have to discard the 2nd Treasure Cruise or the Stoke. And it's going to be the 2nd Cruise. But now he draws 3. Negate, Hordeling Outburst, Island. Really, that Island, really important with the Negate. So he gets to hold up Negate here.
Yeah, that's not a bad set of cards to find. Whirling Outburst, too. If he can get through this turn, and Negate probably lets him do that, then he gets to play Whirling Outburst, loot again. He's got something going.
This is that situation where I was saying before, the guy who resolves the first Treasure Cruise often gets to have the second one. It's because he gets to draw stuff like Negate. Mm-hmm. So maybe Ross also has a cruise, which I believe Ross does. His won't resolve. One thing to note, however, is that Casey's at 7. And these decks can do a fantastic job, especially on this kind of board, of looting into burn.
Lightning Strike, Stoke the Flames, Jeskai Charms. There's a lot floating around here. And Ross has a lot of control over his draws. Even if the Treasure Cruise doesn't resolve, he still gets another loot out of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. 3 cards in hand for Ross. 6 cards in the yard. Treasure Cruise is awfully cheap right now. It's already down to 2 if he wants to delve his yard. Ross wants it to be cheaper. Looks like he's going to start on Raise the Alarm. Gets the loot.
Again, this is net neutral, mana-wise.
You see Ross has a Jeskai Charm in hand, actually, so he is very close to having Casey dead. Discarding Treasure Cruise. That's good. That's not good if you're Casey.
and he's still willing to negate it, which is, I guess he has to, but if Ross is willing to discard a Treasure Cruise here.
Oh, that means you have a Lethal Burn in hand.
Or another
something.
Treasure Cruise.
Yeah. That's either bonus Treasure Cruise or Lethal Burn. And Ross does. He has a Stoke and a Jeskai Charm. So there's a big thing to weigh here. If Ross waits till he draws a card, he can loot off one of these. But he also risks counter magic.
Yeah.
See Casey drawing Anger the Gods for this turn. So he also has boarded in his sweepers.
So the plan here might be for Ross to just, if Casey taps out, he'll go for it, and otherwise he'll wait to build up a bit of a hand because he's under no pressure right now.
We're going to start this Hordling Outburst from Casey. Trigger to loot. There is the worry that Casey will draw into a negate if you wait too long, however.
Yes.
He drew in to Stoke the Flames. Casey will discard that Anger of the Gods. And Ross doesn't know it, but Casey is dead to Ross's burn spells.
Well, he still gets another look at it because he can Stoke the Flames and get a loot that allows him to find negate. So Casey's not dead just yet.
Ross is going to go for broke here. Stoke the Flames. Can Casey counter? He's not going to try for it.
Yeah, I mean, he had a... unless that was a Magma Spray or something in his hand. If that was Stoke the Flames,
I think he drew the last couple of cards there at the end, and the consolation prize is it's not there. He doesn't have one.
Yeah.
So.
In any event, Ross Merriam 2-1, and now we'll likely have a win and in next round with Jeskai tokens. Quite the performance for this deck today.
Really great match between the two players here too. It's a really interesting matchup, I would say. There's a lot of play to it.
And I can get behind bringing in Anger of the Gods in the mirror match because Ross was able to navigate that beautifully.
Well, it matters, and I think that's the key to it, right? You said it's so hard to come back from behind, and Anger it's a reset button, and you can see, especially Rossi, he really needed to have access to that, even if it means he has to loot it away sometimes, and sometimes it'll be dead in his hand.
He looked like he was dead to rights.
Yeah,
he was so far
absolutely.
behind on the board. His Ascendancy wasn't worth very much because he had no creatures in play, facing down a huge army. And Anger of the Gods caught him all the way up, and then Ross was able to pull it out. It was still a little hairy from there, but very impressive win for Ross game 3.
All right, this is game 3 happening here between Glenn Jones and Rob Hunsaker. Glenn was 7-0.